I knew something was off the moment Russell walked in wearing a crushed velvet blazer and shoes that looked like he stole them off a magician's corpse. His handshake was damp. His smile was condescending. And his first sentence to me before even finding the bathroom was, "So what exactly do you do here?" 20 years in risk and controls, and I've seen plenty. Forged expense reports, shady vendor deals, even a guy who billed the company for a psychic reading. But Russell, he was different. Not because he was some criminal mastermind, oh no, that would have required planning. Russell was a storm of arrogance and tech bro buzzwords trapped in a man who thought spreadsheets were intimidating. When my old boss, Henry, retired, I braced for change. What I didn't expect was a man whose entire understanding of compliance could be printed on a cocktail napkin. By week 2, Russell had streamlined 3 internal policies, meaning he deleted them and called it innovation. And yet I stayed calm. I kept doing my job, I documented, I flagged what needed flagging. I sent my weekly compliance alerts and CC'd him as protocol dictated. That's when it happened. Tuesday morning, 10:13 a.m. Mid-meeting with finance and procurement, Russell interrupts me mid-sentence, and says, "Sandra, stop CCing me on your paranoid reports." The room went silent. Our finance director literally coughed into her water. I just blinked. Paranoid? For flagging a vendor invoice that jumped $220K in a single quarter with no corresponding change in scope. For reminding folks that backdating approvals is technically illegal. But here's the thing about being called paranoid in corporate America. It usually means you're 5 minutes ahead of a scandal. And hey, before we go any deeper down this rabbit hole, quick pause if you're listening and find yourself yelling YES at your phone because you've had your own Russell, maybe take a second to hit the subscribe button. Toss us a like while you're at it. It seriously keeps our little storytelling operation from spiraling into the void like a doomed invoice audit. All right, back to the fun. I didn't respond to Russell in that meeting. Just took a sip of my cold coffee, smiled politely, and jotted down his exact words in my notes. And then, I kept right on documenting. Over the next 2 weeks, Russell's disdain for oversight morphed from irritating to dangerous. He started fast-tracking vendor approvals without a second glance. He signed off on expense reports from departments he wasn't even managing. And when I flagged a retroactive contract approval, literally dated before the vendor had even been onboarded, he called it creative problem solving. I knew what I was dealing with, not a criminal, not yet, but a man too arrogant to know he was leaving digital fingerprints all over a ticking time bomb. The cracks were widening, and me? I was just trying not to fall through them. Then came the kicker. I stumbled on a vendor trail that didn't make sense. One number, just one, on a consolidated invoice was off by $37,502. I double-checked, then triple-checked. The supporting documentation? Missing the approval chain, broken the timestamp, after hours logged under Russell's credentials. I asked him nicely via email for clarification. His response, "You're not here to dig, just report." It was like a switch flipped. See, I wasn't looking to burn him, not yet. But I also wasn't about to be collateral damage in his House of Cards version of leadership. So I did what any seasoned risk officer would do when the train starts speeding toward the edge. I quietly removed him from the CC line and forwarded my next report directly to corporate compliance. It started with a smirk. That stupid, performative, "I'm the smartest guy in the room" smirk Russell wore whenever he was about to bulldoze common sense with some tech bro fever dream masquerading as innovation. We were in the weekly finance/procurement sync. Me, Janet from ops, Amir from finance, and a couple of vendor managers who looked like they'd rather be eaten alive by printers than sit through another hour of Russell's vision. I had just wrapped up a slide summarizing a vendor anomaly. One of the smaller third-party firms had submitted a duplicate invoice for Q2. It wasn't major, not yet, but I had flagged it because the approval timestamp predated the actual scope of work. In normal companies, that's called fraud. In ours, apparently it was called Tuesday. Russell leaned back in his ergonomic throne, custom ordered by the way because the standard chairs didn't align with his spine energy, and laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh my God, Sandra, again with the vendor paranoia? What next? Are we going to audit the janitors? Maybe check if the vending machine guy has a Cayman account?" The room chuckled, uneasy, polite. Amir looked down at his notepad like it had betrayed him. I didn't laugh. I didn't blink. I just clicked to the next slide and said, "Per policy, any flagged invoice over $25K with missing documentation must be escalated within 48 hours. That clock started yesterday. Russell waved his hand like he was swatting a fly made of logic and accountability. "We're sunsetting that policy," he said, then added with a grin, "Don't worry, it's part of the new streamlined approval framework. Modernizing the whole risk process." Modernizing, that was the word he used, like slapping duct tape on a leak and calling it waterproofing. His streamlined process, it meant skipping the 3 approval rule, removing finance's second-dize review, and introducing a magical new phrase, retroactive alignment, which is corporate for "we'll sign it later if no one catches it." It wasn't policy anymore. It was improv theater with invoices. my inbox. Once a sacred temple of red flags and risk matrices became a ghost town. The weekly controls dashboard I compiled? Unread. My compliance heat maps? Unopened. He even had the nerve to cancel the monthly risk review call and replace it with a Slack channel called #NoRedTape. I tried to speak with him privately once. Caught him between his vision boarding session and whatever team-building nightmare he was planning with foam swords. I said, Russell, you're making approvals without documented oversight. That's exposure. Serious exposure. He didn't look up from his phone. You worry too much. This is why risk teams get ignored. You create problems just to solve them. I stood there for a full 5 seconds waiting to see if he'd realize what he'd just said. He didn't, so I went back to my desk. I opened the invoice archive. I kept digging. That's when I saw it, buried inside a zipped folder labeled Vendor Reclass Q2 Catch-up. A single invoice from a new IT vendor, dated April 3rd, but the vendor wasn't approved until April 17th. Even worse, the line item was split. 2 charges, same deliverable, same week. Total, $149,750. Split just below the $75K auto-escalation threshold. Cute trick. I cross-referenced it with project logs. No record of the service. Checked the approval trail. Nothing, just one line, approved R.W. Russell, of course. At first, I thought maybe it was sloppy bookkeeping. Maybe someone fat-fingered a date, maybe a late-night approval got mistimed. But the more I looked, the more the story stank. This wasn't one invoice, it was a pattern. And the pattern had his signature all over it. But try explaining that to anyone. HR was too busy hosting another wellness in the workplace webinar. Finance had gone radio silent, probably sick of Russell overriding their approvals like he was swiping left on integrity. And legal? Let's just say they were allergic to things they might have to testify about later. So I did what I do best. I documented quietly, thoroughly, precisely. And I made a folder on my personal drive, Russell Ghost Trail, because if I was going to get thrown under a bus, I'd make damn sure someone knew who was driving. It was a rainy Wednesday when I crossed the line, not the kind of poetic thunderstorm you see in movies, just a miserable gray sky dripping like a leaky faucet outside the break room window. Russell had called in sick, which probably meant he was off somewhere drinking celery sludge in a sensory deprivation tank, or attending a seminar on thought leadership through vague emails. Either way, the office was quiet, just the clack of keyboards and the faint hum of collective burnout. I had a few hours to myself, rare these days, so I dove back into the vendor audit trail I'd been piecing together after hours like some corporate Nancy Drew with insomnia and a vendetta. What I found that day changed everything. There were retroactive entries, not just one or two, a string of them, at least 7 invoices, all from newer vendors Russell had personally fast-tracked, had been logged after the services were supposedly delivered. The timestamps didn't align. Some were input weeks after the date of service. Others had approval signatures but no attached documentation. The most alarming part, every single one bore Russell's initials, RW, in the authorization field. And one had been logged from his account at 2:14 a.m. Who the hell signs vendor payments at 2:14 in the morning? No justification, no memo, no trail of review or discussion. Just greenlit money flowing out like we were running a bake sale with gold bricks. At first, I stared at the screen, hoping it was a system glitch. Maybe some migration error from our ERP platform. I even called over Mark from IT to double-check the audit logs. He confirmed it, manual entries, no backup, no IP spoofing. Clean as an untraceable but real. I felt it then. That cold curl of dread in my stomach. Not panic, not fear, just resolve. The kind of clarity that comes when you realize that if you stay quiet, you become an accomplice. So I did what any seasoned woman in compliance knows to do when standing 3 inches from a bonfire started by a man who thinks rules are suggestions. I sent him an email. Subject line, vendor entry discrepancies request for clarification. I attached a 2-page summary of the audit log entries in question. I included screenshots, invoice IDs, and side-by-side comparisons of expected vs actual approval chains. I even threw in a link to our internal documentation policy. Polite, factual, neutral. It took him 6 minutes to respond. His reply, exactly, you're not here to dig, just report. No greeting, no signature, just that one sentence like a slap in Arial 11-point font. I stared at it for a long time. Something in me snapped, not loudly, not like a crack, more like the sound of a seatbelt clicking into place right before impact. I didn't reply. I opened my compliance escalation template. I removed Russell from the CC field, and I attached the report to an encrypted email addressed to the corporate compliance officer, Janice Whitmore. No commentary, no rant, just a professional subject line, pattern of vendor anomalies, immediate review recommended, and the facts. Click sent. And with that, I crossed it, the invisible line. Up until that point, I'd still been holding out some naive hope that maybe Russell was just clueless, that maybe this was a mess he'd clean up once he realized how bad it looked, that maybe I wouldn't have to be the one lighting the match. But after that email, no more illusions. Wasn't trying to destroy him, but I was damn sure not going down for his sins. Nothing came, no reply from Janice in compliance. No calendar invite, no follow-up. Just silence as thick and suffocating as the burnt coffee smell that lingered near the breakroom sink. 2 weeks passed, then 3, and during that stretch, Russell got bolder. First, he pulled me off 2 cross-functional vendor projects I'd been leading for years. No explanation, no conversation. One morning I logged in and poof, access revoked. Files gone. Project Slack channels archived. When I asked about it, he just grinned and said, "We're reallocating you to areas better aligned with your style." My new assignment? A beautifully vague initiative titled Legacy Risk Archive Optimization. Translation: combing through old SharePoint folders and flagging expired contracts no one cared about anymore. I was effectively benched, shelved like a rotary phone in a smartphone world. At first, I thought maybe it was a temporary shift. Maybe they needed a quick cleanup before the next audit cycle. But then procurement stopped copying me on purchase discussions. Finance started closing invoices without routing them to risk. And legal stopped replying to my memos entirely. Even my badge stopped opening the 14th floor conference wing. That's where Russell held his leadership huddles, which had the same energy as a cult meeting held in a WeWork. I told myself it was fine, that I'd done the right thing, but the whispers started. You know the ones that float just out of earshot but always seem to die down when you walk past the copy room. She used to be tight with the old CFO, didn't she piss off the new guy already? I heard she flagged him to corporate. I kept my head down, kept documenting, kept trying to believe the system would catch up. But each passing day chipped away at that belief. Even my friends in the office started pulling away, not because they didn't support me, but because no one wants to be caught too close to someone circling the drain. There's a smell to career death and it makes people nervous. They start forgetting to invite you to lunch. They stop tagging you in comments. They use phrases like optics and just playing it safe. And the worst part, doubt, it crept in like black mold under wallpaper. What if I had overstepped? What if this whole thing was just a misunderstanding I'd blown out of proportion? What if I was becoming the thing Russell said I was? Paranoid, rigid, outdated? Late one night, I sat in the office, long after most had gone home. The only light was the glow from my dual monitors, both filled with spreadsheets no one would read. I stared at the folder on my desktop, Russell Ghost Trail, and hovered my finger over delete. Maybe it was easier that way. Maybe if I just stopped pushing, I could fade back into whatever non-critical purgatory they'd created for me and ride it out until early retirement. And then I saw it, a calendar invite. Subject, compliance pre-audit review, from Janice, set for next Tuesday. No other invitees, just me. My heart didn't race, it didn't skip, it just stopped. Then, calmly, it started again. I clicked accept. Whatever was coming, I was back on the field. And something told me the silence was finally breaking. Tuesday arrived like a funeral in business casual. The invite had been sitting on my calendar all weekend, a little gray box quietly blinking between lunch and learn, workplace positivity and vendor queue for forecast review. I didn't dare mention it to anyone, not that anyone would have cared. I'd been demoted to office wallpaper by then, seen, ignored, occasionally dusted off for DEI metrics. Compliance pre-audit review, no other details, no prep doc, just a Zoom link from Janice Whitmore and a polite note. Please be prepared to discuss your Q2 findings in confidence. I logged in 2 minutes early because habits die hard. Screen black, just the words, "Your host will let you in shortly." My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I felt like a soldier waiting for a landmine to confess its location. Then click, I was in. Janice looked exactly like I remembered her. Blunt bob, cat-eye glasses, blazer-like armor, but her expression was softer than I expected. Not warm, just measured, like a chess player halfway through the game and already 10 moves ahead. "Hi, Sandra," she said, nodding once. "Thanks for joining." I gave the usual pleasantries, tried to keep my voice level. I hadn't spoken to anyone above my pay grade in weeks. I felt like I was using muscles that had started to atrophy. She didn't waste time. "I reviewed the documentation you submitted," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Let's just say, it was eye-opening." There it was. A heartbeat thumped behind my ear. She shared her screen. Spreadsheet, vendor log, my flagged entries highlighted in red. Then a new column, exposure level, and beside 3 of the entries, level 1 high risk. She scrolled down. More entries, more red. "We've identified patterns that require immediate escalation, and after reviewing the approval anomalies, we've decided to trigger a surprise audit this quarter." My mouth went dry. "This quarter? Next week," she said. "The team's already booked. We'll be on site Monday morning. Quiet rollout. No advance notice to operational leadership." I nodded slowly. My screen felt suddenly too bright. "My office chair too stiff. We'll need your continued discretion," she added. "And your support walking the auditors through your findings in context." Support, that's what they were calling it. "Of course," I said before I could think better of it. Janice leaned forward slightly, her voice lower. "You did the right thing, just so we're clear. This could have gone very differently if you hadn't flagged it when you did." I didn't feel relief, not exactly. More like the way your stomach flips when the roller coaster pauses at the top of the drop. You're not dying, but you're definitely not safe. She thanked me again, ended the call, and just like that, I was staring at my own reflection in a black Zoom box, blinking back at me like it knew what I'd done. I sat there for a long time. My email pinged, a new invite, compliance audit kickoff Monday, 8 o'clock a.m. That was 5 days away. 5 days to act like everything was normal while the bomb I helped build ticked louder by the hour. I closed my laptop, locked my screen, walked down to the vending machine. I didn't want chips. I just needed something, anything to do with my hands. Russell passed me on the way back up the hallway, holding one of those disgusting green smoothies and humming something that sounded like an elevator's death rattle. He didn't look at me, didn't nod, even pretend I existed. I looked at him like a man who'd already stepped into his grave but hadn't noticed the dirt yet. He thought the silence meant he'd won. He had no idea the countdown had already begun. They arrived 2 days early. No warning, no lead-in, no warm-up act. Just 6 people in dark blazers and neutral expressions, rolling their wheeled carry-ons like corporate assassins into the lobby at 7:12 a.m. Word spread like printer fire, quiet at first, then faster, louder. By 8 o'clock, the tension in the building was thick enough to staple. The receptionist whispered to someone in facilities. Facilities told the security desk. By the time Russell showed up at 8:37 with his usual smoothie and his usual self-importance, the entire 6th floor already knew something was happening, and that it wasn't good. I watched him from the stairwell as he walked through the doors, eyes flicking toward the glass conference room where 2 auditors were already unpacking binders like they were about to perform an autopsy. He paused for half a second, blinked, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Showtime. I stayed in my office. No one told me to, but I knew better. My name was on the reports. My fingerprints were on the grenade. I wasn't about to go waltzing into the blast radius until summoned. Still, I could feel the tremors. Every so often, someone from finance or legal would scurry past my office like a shadow. No small talk, no eye contact. Even the guy from IT, Mike, who usually stopped to make awkward jokes, just shuffled by with a laptop hugged to his chest like a shield. By 9:15, the boardroom blinds were pulled shut. That was when I really knew it was serious. They never pulled the blinds. Not unless there were tears, legal threats, or both. Then the emails started. Access requests, password resets, logs, archived folders. The auditors wanted everything: vendor master files, approval workflows, ERP exports, Russell's email trails from the last 12 months. I got copied on one of the requests by accident, or maybe not by accident. It was a request for the vendor onboarding dashboard I'd built before Russell sunsetted in favor of a Google Sheet with 0 version control and color-coded emojis. Subject line: Urgent Archived Controls Environment. The name at the bottom: Janice Whitmore. I could picture her perfectly standing just behind the auditors, arms crossed, watching Russell sweat through his blazer as he tried to turn a bonfire into a candlelight dinner. I didn't have to be in the room to know what was happening. He'd try to charm them first. Jokes, fake transparency, corporate caviar. He'd act like the issues were growing pains, that compliance was an evolving landscape. He might even toss in a phrase like agile controls architecture to make it sound like chaos was intentional. But I also knew this audit team. They didn't laugh, they didn't flinch. They didn't care about Russell's self-authored leadership quotes or his LinkedIn followers. They cared about numbers, timestamps, signatures, and the lack thereof. At 10:42 a.m. I saw him. Through the glass, through the slight gap in the blinds, just enough to catch a sliver of movement. Russell standing, arms raised, gesturing wildly. One of the auditors held up a printout. He leaned forward, pointed at something. Russell stopped moving. His jaw twitched, then the blinds snapped shut again. I sat back in my chair and exhaled, slow and quiet. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. By noon, legal had shut down the shared drive. Finance had gone fully silent. Even the cafeteria posted a paper sign, closed for private event. And me? I just waited. Every footstep outside my office made my heart hitch. Every phone ring felt like a drumbeat before a verdict. I wasn't afraid, not exactly, but I knew the sound of walls closing in, and I could hear them shifting, one binder at a time. My phone buzzed at 2:13 p.m. just once. A calendar ping. Subject: Quick clarification, audit team follow-up. Location: Executive boardroom. Time: now, no context, no sender listed, just one of those gray invites that felt more like a summons than a meeting. I stared at it for a second. My stomach did that awful half-twist, like when you realize you left the stove on or hit reply all on an email meant for one. I checked my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor. Blouse straight, hair decent. Poker face, engaged. I stood up, legs a little heavier than usual, and walked the corridor like I was headed to confession. The boardroom door was already open. Inside, the audit team seated like a tribunal. Janice, the CEO, pale, lips pressed so tight they looked painted on. Our chief legal officer, her arms folded like armor. Russell stood near the wall, not sitting. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, but he couldn't hide the sweat prints blooming under his armpits like storm clouds. Janice nodded at me. Sandra, thanks for joining. Just a few follow-ups regarding your submission. I nodded, careful, neutral. I wasn't here to spike the ball. I was here to survive. She lifted the report, my report, the one I had quietly sent weeks ago. The header now had a bold red tag slapped across the top. Level 1 Escalation Financial Risk Exposure, ESD. $40 million, she set it gently on the table like it was a loaded weapon. Sandra, can you confirm that you authored this? She asked. Yes, I said, voice even. Submitted July 19 via encrypted internal escalation protocol, and that these entries reflect transactions bypassing standard vendor approval workflows? Yes. Can you confirm the authorization signatures listed in column F? I nodded once. They match audit log metadata and platform credential usage. I verified them twice before submission. Janice looked at the CEO and passed him the document. He flipped a few pages, skimmed, stopped. His jaw worked back and forth like he was grinding sand between his teeth. Clause 7B, he read aloud. All third-party expenditures exceeding $25,000 must follow documented routing through risk and controls, with final sign-off by the director or acting leadership delegate. He looked up. At me first. Then Russell. Signed off on half of these, he said slowly. Without routing, without review, without so much as a PDF attached. Russell opened his mouth, but the CEO held up a finger. Not today, not yet. These were filed after services were rendered. Some were split just under the auto-escalation limit, others logged in the middle of the night. Janice added, all of which match a pattern of deliberate override. There is no plausible administrative explanation. The room fell silent, thick with static and judgment. Then the CEO stood, tossed the report on the table with a dry slap, and turned full body toward Russell. His voice, when it came, wasn't a yell. It was worse, quiet and stunned, and laced with a fury so cold it could bend steel. What chaos did you just unleash? Russell's lips moved like they were trying to form words, but all that came out was air. Looked like a man trying to explain away a car crash while holding the steering wheel in his hands. Legal cleared her throat. We'll need to begin disclosures to our financial partners. Immediately, Janice added, and to regulatory before end-of-quarter reporting. Non-disclosure at this stage would trigger multiplier penalties. The CEO didn't look at anyone else. He just stared at Russell. Out, now. For a second, Russell didn't move. Then he turned, slow and stupid, and walked out the door like a man leaving his own execution. Not a single soul in the room looked after him. Janice finally exhaled. Sandra, we may need you to sit in on follow-ups as liaison. For continuity, I nodded. No one thanked me, no one smiled, but no one needed to. Because in that room, with that binder still warm from the CEO's hand, the truth was louder than any applause. He made one last, pathetic play. Happened barely 30 minutes after he was told to leave. I was back at my desk, staring blankly at a compliance workflow that now felt like the blueprint of a crime scene, when the internal chat notification popped up in the corner of my screen. Sandra, join us in Conference 3B. Russell's requested to provide context. My first thought was context for what? He already had the shovel, the grave, and his fingerprints all over the body. But I gathered my notebook, badge, and whatever was left of my patience and walked the short hall to the glass-walled fishbowl they called 3B. Inside, the CEO, Janice, legal, one of the lead auditors, and Russell, again standing, not seated, looking red-faced and jittery like a man who'd just tried to climb out of quicksand by tugging harder on his necktie. The second I stepped through the door, he started. This is a witch hunt, he snapped. Sandra's had this information for months. She buried it. If anything, she's the one who dropped the ball. She dug it up and didn't say anything until now. The CEO didn't move. Legal didn't blink, but Janice tilted her head, slow and surgical. She slid a document forward, a printed timeline. Each entry marked, alert filed, risk flag raised. Vendor escalation CC'd, the oldest one dated 6.5 months ago. Each one timestamped, verified, and every single one like clockwork, either responded to by someone else or completely ignored by Russell. The board's lawyer, who hadn't said a word all meeting, finally did. She didn't look at Russell when she spoke, she looked at the document. They were flagged, she said flatly, you ignored them. Silence fell so hard it rang in my ears. Russell opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. His tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth like it could stop the flood from breaching the dam. It didn't. The CEO stood. Didn't even look at him. HR is waiting outside, and just like that it was over. He left with nothing, no speech, no exit parade, no backup plan. Just the sound of his shoes squeaking against the tile as the HR rep with the sympathetic expression escorted him down the hallway like a diffused bomb. The door clicked shut behind him. The air in the room didn't lighten. It thickened. Janice turned to me. We'll need you to remain, at least temporarily, to walk the remediation team through what's been compromised. Of course, I said. It came out calm. Almost too calm, and Sandra Legal added, we'll be drafting our self-reporting disclosure this afternoon. If you have any documentation that hasn't been submitted yet, now's the time. I nodded. It's already in the folder, titled Ghost Trail. The room was quiet again, this time with a different kind of silence. Not tension, not fear, respect, maybe, or at least recognition. As I left the room, the hallway looked different. Same gray carpet, same flickering light over the copier, but it felt quieter, like a storm had passed through and scrubbed everything raw. Back at my desk, my inbox was no longer a graveyard. New subject lines were rolling in. Vendor audit request, urgent controls restoration plan, immediate assistance, needed compliance lead. Temporary reassignment authorization, no promotions. No titles, not yet, but I was no longer invisible. I wasn't celebrating, but I was breathing, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like oxygen. The damage report was scheduled for 7:30 a.m. before the building came alive, before most people had their first coffee, before the whispers could begin again. Closed door, executive level only. No assistants, no public minutes. Just 12 chairs, one long table. And the digital carcass of everything Russell had built now flayed wide open on a 60-inch monitor. I wore navy. No frills, no colors. Just clean lines and pressed fabric, armor disguised as professionalism. My hair was back. My notes were printed. My backup flash drive was encrypted and labeled. I wasn't here to guess. I was here to bury what needed burying. They gave me 20 minutes. I took 12. I walked them through it step by step. Vendor hash 14,328. Retroactively billed for services not scoped in any contract. Invoice cluster delta 04. Signatures forged from admin-level credentials after midnight. Approval chain failures 6. Internal policy violations 14. Estimated exposure $40.3 million. I didn't editorialize, didn't color outside the lines. I spoke in clean numbers, clear failures, repeatable evidence. My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't shake. They asked questions. I answered. When the CFO pushed back, asked how it could have gone on so long, I just clicked to the final slide. One page, my original escalation memo, time-stamped, bullet-pointed, boring even, and at the very bottom in pale gray font just before the signature line, Russell's reply, stop CCing me on your paranoid reports. Silence, not the awkward kind, not the tense kind. Just silence, absolute, clean. The kind of silence that only comes when truth drops like a gavel and no one's stupid enough to argue. The CEO leaned back in his chair, rubbed the bridge of his nose. Someone exhaled. And then the CFO, usually so smooth, so smug, muttered under his breath, almost like a confession. This is why you do CC people. Nobody laughed. There were no gold stars, no parade, no laminated Employee of the Month certificate. Just a slow nod from legal. A thank you from Janice. A note from the CEO's office later that day. Pending further review, Sandra Martin will serve as interim head of compliance and ethics. I didn't reply right away. I just closed my email, stood up, and walked the long way back to my office. Past finance, past legal, past procurement, and past the glass door that used to read Russell Weller VP, Strategic Operations. Now it was just a blank pane of frosted glass. Empty inside, no plaques, no plants, just an abandoned ergonomic chair and a desk that looked smaller without his ego sitting on top of it. I walked right past it, didn't pause, didn't peek. Back at my desk, a small white envelope was propped against my monitor. Inside, a fresh badge, new title, new department, same name. I slid it into place on my lanyard, snapped the clip shut, and sat down. Because I wasn't done, not yet, there were still loose ends to tie. Policies to restore, controls to reinforce, and stories to rewrite, starting with the one where they called it paranoia. I called it my job, and report by report, memo by memo, I buried the empire he tried to build on silence. It didn't collapse. I took it down, one line at a time. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.